there were 2 Jews in the Holocaust. And, I mean, there were more than 2 Jews in the Holocaust, but this story is focusing on 2 Jews in the Holocaust. And the Nazis had this thing where they would try to psychologically torture people. And to that end, what they would do sometimes is they would give one Jew a gun, and then they would send him off to the forest with another Jew. The point being that the Jew with the gun would have to shoot the Jew without the gun, and that's how they would kill people, but also get their kicks in regards to psychological torture, that then the person who did the shooting needed to live with the fact that they killed someone. So the 2 Jews are walking through the forest, and the Jew with the gun is a misnagid, the Jew without the gun is a chassid, and they're walking through the forest, and the Jew without the gun asks the Jew with the gun, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to survive? And the Jew with the gun says, what do you mean? I don't know how you're going to survive. I know how I'm going to survive. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, I'm going to shoot you. So the chassid said, but there's a clear Gemara that it says that you're not supposed to kill someone in order to save your own life. And the reasoning in the Gemara is that it says, what have you seen that makes you believe that your blood is redder than their blood? That is to say, if you kill someone else, why is it that you deserve to live more than that person? As in, whatever consequences might happen, let the consequences happen, but not in the sense that you should be actively deciding that preserving your life is greater than taking the next person's. So the Masagid said, what do you mean? I have a lot of reasons why I think that my blood is redder than your blood. Which, to a certain extent, you hear that a person who is faced with the choice of saving their own life or someone else's life might very well come up with reasons why they believe their life to be more valuable. Ultimately, it doesn't change the fact that the Gemara paskins that this is how it is. But in the reasoning, you could kind of twist the reasoning if your life is on the line. It says in the pasuk, anything that a person has, they'll give for their own life. It makes sense that they'll also sacrifice integrity. Anyhow, the chassid says, maybe just to shock him out of it, I know there are many misnagdim that would readily give their lives to save another Jew, but the chassid said only a misnagid could think of such a twisted line of reasoning, and so that snapped the misnagid out of it, and he resolved to not kill the chassid. They both went back. They both miraculously survived, and naturally, as one does when you make a friend in the forest, they started a chavrusa, and they were friends together throughout the Holocaust, and they both survived the Holocaust, if I'm not mistaken. So this is, I believe, a true story, and it's a segue into the idea that we have in this week's Tanya about giving your life in order to protect mitzvahs, in order to fulfill mitzvahs. And really it comes in tangent and connection to the Alter Rebbe's whole thesis, which is that we should never do averis, because averis are disconnecting from Hashem. As in, that is the reasoning, the rationale, the emphasis behind why not to do an avera. And that's why it says that any person that does an avera, it's like a ruach shus goes into them, and ultimately that we need to, we have our connection to Hashem that we don't want to forfeit. So then the Alter Rebbe says, you might say, well, I have an exception to the rule, which is that for pikuach nefesh, to save a life, we say that every mitzvah is gone, or almost every mitzvah. We'll get to that shortly in Mitzvah Hashem. But if, let's say, the only way to save a person's life is by eating not kosher, we say eat the not kosher, who, like, it's you need to live. You need to live. And why exactly you need to live? Well, we'll get to Be'ez Hashem. But ultimately, the Alter Rebbe says, okay, so you'll say that the food that the person is eating is klipa, and it's sameh, and how can you be eating the food if ultimately you're disconnecting from Hashem by doing this? So the Alter Rebbe says that not to worry, there's a good answer for this, which is that it's like the Chachamim explained. Which, what did they explain? That you should have the person desecrate one Shabbos in order that they should keep many Shabbosim. The Gemara in Yoma says that the Chacham are trying to figure out why it is Pikuach Nefesh is Deicha. Why Pikuach Nefesh is Deicha most Averes. And so they say that one of the sources is that it says V'shamru b'nei Yisrael Shabbos, that the Jews should guard Shabbos, last as Shabbos, to make Shabbos the Deri Sum for generations. And so they say that means that you should keep an eye on the future generations in regards to keeping Shabbos. That is to say, that if, let's say, I have a person and they need life-saving intervention on Shabbos, and the life-saving intervention happens to be a Chilul Shabbos, So we say that in order to enable that they should be keeping more Shabbosim in the future, we should be Mechal Shabbos for them now. The guarding of Shabbos is weighed. You weigh it against future Shabbosim in order to know if you should save the guy's life. And if you're able to save the guy's life, not to know if you should save the guy's life, if you should be Mechal Shabbos. And if you can have more Shabbosim kept in the future, then we say better to desecrate this Shabbos so they should be able to keep more Shabbosim. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. And he says, and it's not it's not because of the lightness, the laxity, I guess, of Averis or their stringency. Then the Alter Rebbe comes in brackets. He says, hey, that you should know that Shabbos is as stringent and it has the same weight as Avodah Zarah in regards to the shchita of a mummer l'darachad. There is a concept in shchita. If a person rejects the entire Torah, obviously their shchita is no good. They're rejecting the idea of shchita. Even if they, not to get into that, ultimately if a person rejects the entire Torah, their shchita is no good. What about someone that rejects only one or two mitzvahs? Only one mitzvah. So to that we say that there are only a couple of exceptions. There are a couple of things that make a person that they are not able to shecht if it's a mitzvah that they reject. Arguably, nevela. Arguably, if they eat not kosher themselves, that is to say that they eat particularly unshechted meat, or meat that isn't shechted properly. So that is one idea. But then the two things that definitely everyone agrees on, it's clear in the Gemara and Cholin, is Avodah Zarah and Shabbos. Shabbos before Hesed particularly, that they desecrate Shabbos in a public manner. And the Alter Rebbe says this is in your idea in Siman Beis. So Masha'enkin v'mumar l'gilei rayis. This is not the case with a mumar for gilei rayis, someone that is a mumar, an apostate, that they disregard Averis of gilei rayis. And even so, Pikuach Nefesh deicha Shabbos v'gilei rayis ela d'gzeres hakosifo. Pikuach Nefesh still pushes away Shabbos and not gilei rayis. And the reason why is because it's Gzeres HaKosov. It's what the Torah decrees. So now that we're here, we have a few questions that I'd like to ask on this, and I think that we can maybe give a little bit of perspective, and that'll be the share. So the first question is, why is it that the Alter Rebbe chooses to quote this Gemara in Yoma about Machai B'hem? The reason why this is a question is because really the Gemara over there actually says, I think it's Rava that says, that every one of the sources that are given by the Chachamim, besides for one, have something that you could push it away with. And this one is no exception. The reason that Rava uses to push this away is that he says, this only applies if you have a vadai, if you are certain about what you're doing. That is to say, you have a person, and there's a way to be Mechal Shabbos in order to save their life. If you know that for sure their life will be saved, then you can start making calculations. If you don't know for sure that their life will be saved, there's a rule, Bari B'Shem Bari Adif. I'm sure you can take this Gemara in many different ways, just bear with me at least on this. There's a rule, Bari B'Shem Bari Adif, that something that is certain is better than something which is uncertain. So this person certainly right now will be keeping Shabbos. As for them in the future, maybe, you have no idea. Maybe this intervention will work, maybe it won't. What if it's a 10% chance? Your chances are pretty slim that they're going to be keeping another Shabbos in the future based on this intervention. What the Gemara concludes is that V'chai B'hem. It says in Parashas Achar and Moshe, if I'm not mistaken, that you should keep the mitzvahs v'chai b'hem. These are the mitzvahs, etc. That v'chai b'hem, that you should live in them. V'lo yamos b'hem. Not that you should die in them. That the ultimate of every mitzvah is simply so that you should live with it. And that is to say that if there's any shadow of a doubt in any mitzvah that is going to cost a person's life, mitzvahs are off the table. Saving a life automatically just cuts out any notion of there being a mitzvah here or there. So that is the idea of v'chai b'hem. That is what's possible in the Shulchan Aruch. Maybe Vishamar was also brought, but that is what's possible in the Shulchan Aruch, and that is the general notion that we use to explain why it is that we would violate an Avera in order to save someone's life. Why is it that the Alter Rebbe chooses to bring over here the road less traveled, the less common answer that's given, and the one that's really seemingly in the Gemara actually pushed away? The next question would be, let's say that we get past that. What's missing in what the Alter Rebbe is saying that the Alter Rebbe has to bring brackets? He's saying that Shabbos is like a Avodah Zarah, looking your idea of Siman Beis, and it's not the case with the Mumar L'Gilei Rayis. So what's missing in the bracket? I seemingly you would think, okay, well, you have the basic straightforward thing. Okay, so it's not that Averis are worse or better. It's simply that Hashem Renei Sal Shabbos. What's missing that the Alter Rebbe has to bring a whole brackets in order to explain it. The next question. Why not just say that you have the same question that stands, which is, let me frame it like this. You're saying Gilei Rayis, Shabbos worse than Gilei Rayis. So let me tell you, I'll tell you the worst Avera of all is Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah. Why? Because Sai Avodah Zarah is Yareg Val Yaver. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. We learn that it says, even if they kill you, you need to give your life to avoid serving Avodah Zarah. And so, yeah, it's Yareg Val Yaver, that you should rather be killed than give up your life. So you'll tell me, I Shabbos. Well, I'll tell you, right there alongside Shabbos for Hesya, by the way, which has a certain exception to the rule, is in the person, this is Mechal Shabbos, not for Hesya, their Shechita is still fine. But Avodah Zarah is right there. Someone that serves Avodah Zarah, their Shechita is also not kosher. So, what are you hoping to accomplish now, as in you brought Shabbos? Why not just ask the question about Avodah Zarah? The next question is a little bit technical. I'm just going down the list of everything that you could ask in the Alter Rebbe in order. Why is it that the Alter Rebbe quotes Shulchan Aruch? He could have quoted Maseches Cholin. Is a Gemara Maseches Cholin. And the Alter Rebbe, if we'll notice until this point in Tanya, seems to be very, very comfortable with quoting Gemaras. I mean, the beginning of Tanya is Tanya Seif Per Gimel Denida. So, yeah, the Alter Rebbe is very comfortable quoting Gemaras. Why is it that the Alter Rebbe is choosing to quote Shulchan Aruch over here? Then, we could ask another question. We asked about Avodah Zarah. Why is it that Alter Rebbe chooses to ignore the fact that Avodah Zarah seemingly breaks his rule, breaks his idea? Why is it that Alter Rebbe says Gilei Rayis? He doesn't say murder. It's a little bit technical, because if he would have said murder, you could have said, why doesn't he say Gilei Rayis? But Taka, why doesn't he say, why is there a reason why he says Gilei Rayis? I think it ties into the entire thing that we're going to be trying to get at for explaining the Alter Rebbe's whole rationale over here. Why is it that Alter Rebbe singles out Gilei Rayis? He doesn't mention murder. Maybe he could have mentioned murder, maybe he could have mentioned both of them. And then at the end, he finishes off by saying that it's a Gzeras HaKosov. It's a decree of the Torah. What exactly is the decree that he's referring to? Is it the fact that for Shabbos you give up your life? Is it that you're supposed to give your life for Gilei Rayis? What exactly is it that's going on when we say that it's a Gzeras HaKosov? Okay. Now that we're here, let's back up a second. I think it's a good thing to start with one of the questions we asked in the middle, which is Avodah Zarah. As for why the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring out that Avodah Zarah in an external way would knock out his entire thing, because Avodah Zarah is the most chomer d'kavera, and you're supposed to die rather than violate it, etc., etc. It's a klotz kasha, not in the sense that it's what a real klotz kasha is, which is a question that's very hard to move. It's klotz kasha because you got to be a klotz to ask it to a certain extent. I only asked it mainly as a segue. The reason why the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring it is because it's obvious. So his whole thesis is that an Avera is disconnecting from Hashem. Avodah Zarah will automatically be at the top of every list when it comes to these things. The reason being, because Avodah Zarah is the ultimate denial of a relationship with Hashem. So as far as Yareg Val Yaver, that is the ultimate of when you taka have Yareg Val Yaver. That is the ultimate of a thing that a person should taka be giving their life for. And that's everything the Alter Rebbe has been discussing, a person going on Mesiras Nefesh, and we compare other Averis to Avodah Zarah in the sense that they're all, to a certain extent, a denial of Hashem, but Avodah Zarah is the actual be-all, end-all of a denial of that relationship. It's not that it comes from Klippa, and it's not that it's a negative thing against Torah, it has nothing to do with that. I mean, it has what to do with that, don't get me wrong, but it's not about that. It's about simply the relationship with Hashem, and Avodah Zarah is the ultimate denial of that. So, to come in here and to start saying that Avodah Zarah, Shabbos is chomer than Avodah Zarah, less chomer than Avodah Zarah, it doesn't make a difference. Every other Avera is held up to the standard of Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is the standard of Avera. So, if there's any Avera that you would say, Yaver, Yareg Val Yaver, any Avera that you would say to give your life for, it is Avodah Zarah. If there's any Avera to say that it cuts off a person from mitzvahs, it is Avodah Zarah. It's the same thing it's going to be in Shechita, and it's the same thing it's going to be a rule b'chlal. Someone that serves Avodah Zarah is going to be basically at the bottom of nearly every list. So, when we're here, let's focus on the idea of what the Alter Rebbe says, that the Torah says that you should be mechalel on Shabbos in order to keep more Shabbosim. What's the reasoning going on over here? So, if you say that it's because v'chai that mitzvahs fall away. There's an idea that some mitzvahs are hutra, some mitzvahs are hudcha. What does that mean? Imagine that you have a person who's sick on Shabbos, and he needs to eat 2 figs. That's what the doctor orders. He says 2 figs, the guy will be right as rain. Not 2 figs, and the guy will not be right as rain. So a person valiantly goes out to the fig tree, and he wants to cut off a fig. What does he do? Now imagine that there are 2 ways that he can accomplish this. There's either one branch that has 3 figs, or 2 individual branches that each one has 1 fig. So it doesn't really matter that he's cutting off an extra fig. He should cut off the branch with 3 figs. The reason being because he wants to diminish in desecration of Shabbos. There is an impetus to decreasing the desecration of Shabbos. Now, especially so if there are 2 figs, that he should be decreasing in the desecration of Shabbos. The kunz about the case with 3 figs is that even though you're getting more figs, but you're doing less melacha, so it's preferable to do that. But the point is that you're supposed to try to avoid being mechal Shabbos as much as possible. There's an idea that exists. If you have a person, there's an idea of shechting meat on Shabbos for a sick person. So now it is possible the doctor will say the guy needs kosher meat, and there are certain advantages in the meat itself if the meat is kosher. But imagine the doctor just says that a person needs to eat beef. It doesn't matter who, how, where, what, when. A person needs to eat, or not necessarily beef, but needs to eat meat in general. So you have either shechted chazer, not shechted, but you have killed chazer, you have killed pig, or you have a live cow. So what are you supposed to do on Shabbos? So there's an idea that you're supposed to shech the cow on Shabbos in order to feed this guy meat. Why? You would say Shabbos is a very chomer avera. It carries a death penalty. And eating chazer, firstly, it's not even your avera, it's the other guy's avera. And he has a good excuse, his life is in danger. Let him eat the chazer. And secondly, it's a lighter avera. But we say no, shech the cow on Shabbos. And one of the ideas that are given for this is because at least it's going to be only one avera. But that's a side point. Ultimately, the point over here is that we're supposed to try to diminish in desecration of Shabbos. This is not the case in regards to other things. Let's say when it comes to thesis. In regards to thesis, classic example, thesis need to be made out of wool or linen. Debatable if other things are included. The rest, the rabbanon, but definitely the strings need to be wool or linen. Now, it is possible to have shatnez in thesis because wool or linen are liable to having shatnez. There is a limud that says that the avera of shatnez is hutra when it comes to tzitzis. That is to say, in the face of a garment that has tzitzis, there is no prohibition of shatnez. Now, it does happen to be the Chachamim were geyser about it, and why there's a lot of different reasons that are given. Maybe the strings will fall off, and then it'll turn out that a person's wearing shatnez. Maybe they'll wear it at night. At night is not a time of tzitzis, and so it'll turn out that they're wearing shatnez. There's different answers, explanations that are given, but ultimately, shatnez, tzitzis are not shatnez. Never a case that tzitzis are shatnez, only because you have a gzera derabanan. So, you have the idea that sometimes there is no avera. There is no avera because of something else that comes in. V'chai b'hem is hudcha. It's not that you're able to do anything because the avera no longer is. It's that the avera is pushed away. There is an avera, but you have an excuse. And really, it's to say that you have a scale of priorities, and in the priority of saving someone's life, you don't regard the mitzvah. But the mitzvah is still there. And that's why on Shabbos, you're supposed to try to minimize in the desecration of Shabbos. Because every action that's taken that violates Shabbos is actually desecration of Shabbos. It's not like Shabbos goes away. There's an idea that exists in Rishonim that V'shamar B'nai Yisrael Shabbos, last of the Shabbos L'Deretzam, is a detail in the mitzvah of Shabbos itself. And because it's a detail in the mitzvah of Shabbos itself, that means that it's part of Shabbos. Shabbos is hutra for saving someone's life in order so that they should keep other Shabbosis. It's a particular detail. It's saying that the mitzvah of Shabbos is permitted for this. I hope that you're copying the difference. Shabbos itself contains a detail that says that you should be mechal Shabbos in order to enable future Shabbos observances. So it's part of the mitzvah of Shabbos. It's part of the mitzvah of Shabbos. This is, I think, the idea of the Alter Rebbe, why he's quoting V'shamar B'nai Yisrael Shabbos. I mean, he says Chalal Shabbos Achas, but I think that's the reason why he's saying Chalal Shabbos Achas and not V'chai B'hem, because with V'chai B'hem, you would say, Taka, you're saving your life, but maybe it looks a little bit selfish. Maybe it looks like you're disregarding the relationship with Hashem in favor of saving your life. The Torah tells you that you could do it. Okay, the Torah could tell you that you could do it. It could be mutter al pi Torah. But as far as Alter Rebbe's thesis of disconnecting, you see that there's still an Avera over there. Comes Alter Rebbe and he says, Chalil of Shabbos achas, that it's a mitzvah in Shabbos itself. Now, you'll tell me, okay, other Averas we learn from Chayvahem. It's not the point. The point is that you see that there's an impetus in Torah that exists of Hutra, that exists that it falls away. You want to extend it to other mitzvahs? Taka, we consider it to be Hutcha. But it's not to say that the Torah will never tell you that there's an Avera that will really, really disconnect you from Hashem. If a person does it, Chas v'shalom, it can disconnect them from Hashem. But the Torah will still say, at least in one case, in the case of something that's very chomer, the Torah will say that Taka, you should save your life. And it's not just that you should save your life because we're going to disregard a mitzvah and disregard the relationship with Hashem. Part of the relationship with Hashem is that you should save your life. Once you have this idea that exists, you can no longer say about V'chai B'hem, about Laxer Averis. Shabbos is a pretty chomer dik Avera. About a Laxer Avera, Torah could have said also like that. Once Torah is saying V'chai B'hem, it's telling you, even though it's taka in the realm of Chutcha, that we say that you're supposed to try to minimize in the damage, but it's still in the same sense. It still has the same idea that's behind it. There's an idea that exists that I've toyed with a lot, that really every Hutcha is a variety of Hutra. Obviously, they have different functions, different ways that they're learned, etc., etc. But every Hutcha, ultimately, if you save a person's life, even in a Hutchadik sense, even if you have, I don't know, a suffix, but you do something in order to save someone's life, then ultimately you're not liable. And so it functions to a certain extent the same way as Hutra. If you didn't have the idea of Hutra, you wouldn't be able to pull out such notions. But once you know that there is an idea of Hutra, for something as Chomer as Shabbos, everything else, you say, falls in line with Shabbos. Okay, so now we're here. What's the problem of the Alter Rebbe? We asked, what's the problem of the Alter Rebbe that he has to give his Teda? The problem of the Alter Rebbe is that there is, technically speaking, one Avera that is an outlier. That Avera that is an outlier is Gilei Arayos. Because as far as Shabbos goes, we know for sure, because you have a pasuk that avadai, but you see that their idea exists, avadai of saving someone's life will push off Shabbos. And for every mitzvah that is lighter than Shabbos, which most mitzvahs are, because Shabbos is a chiv of skila, and that's the worst punishment that you could have for an avera. So you see that the idea of a mitzvah becoming mutter, it can apply for Shabbos, and by dint, every other mitzvah that is lower than it. But you have one mitzvah that isn't a undesirable. Undesirable, we said at the beginning, is the whole thesis. It doesn't even make sense to start asking about it. And then it'll always be a case of yareg val yaver, etc., etc. If there is ever any yareg val yaver, it is a undesirable. That is to say, there is a little bit in the days that maybe there's an opinion that says that a undesirable is taka. Not the Reisa Yareg Val Yaver, etc., or maybe even not Yareg Val Yaver, but that's beside the point. I don't want to start giving too in-depth of a share about that. Ultimately, once you have that, there's one exception to the rule. That exception is Gilei Arayos. Why is murder not an exception to the rule? Because murder, we don't know it from the Torah. We know it from logic. We know it from rationality. Now, 100% is possible in Torah, and it's a din in Torah. And it's so much so that it's kind of implied by the way that we know Gilei Arayos. I'll get to that shortly. Murder itself is from the logic of my chazis is the damok sumakfei. What have you seen that makes you believe that person's blood is better than yours? If you'll ask the question of why should you give your life rather than die, the answer is not going to be because the relationship with Hashem, etc., etc. Not to do with that. It has to do with how could you step in and decide whose life is worth more. The reason why you give your life is not because of Hashem saying anything. The reason why you give your life is because of your own logic, your own rationality, or the Gemara's own logic and the Gemara's own rationality. Maybe like the guy in the Holocaust, the person can come up with another logic. But ultimately, the point is that it doesn't exist in the sphere, in the atmosphere, I should say, in the atmosphere of the relationship with Hashem. It's a mitzvah, take, not murdering is a mitzvah, but over here we're concerned not with the mitzvah, we're concerned with the effect of the avera that is performed. And the effect not in a theoretical sense, but in a logical, rational sense. So it doesn't fall in. But you do have Gilei Arayos. How do you learn Gilei Arayos? It's funny, because Gilei Arayos you actually learn from murder. It says about a rapist, it says that rape is a very bad thing, as I'm sure that everyone knows. You don't need a Tanya shift to tell you that. And it says, that like a person stands up upon his fellow and murders his soul, so too is this thing. So the Gemara says, murder, rationally, we know you should rather give your life than take another life. Once we know that, the Torah is telling us, based on this logic, that rape is just as bad. Rape is just as bad. And therefore, the same way that you're rationally obligated to give your life, rape, you might not say that to avoid raping someone, if raping someone at gunpoint is the theoretical notion. To avoid raping someone at gunpoint, you might not say, based on logic, that you should give your life. Maybe you'll say they'll both go to therapy, etc., but the Torah says no, rape is as bad as murder, and so therefore, because you're rationally obligated to give your life to not take another life, so too you are biblically obligated. We'll get there in a second, Blineder. You're biblically obligated to not rape, even at the expense of your life. So you see, that there is an avera that ultimately you give your life for. You give your life for it. And it is Gilei Rayis. And Gilei Rayis is more chomer than Shabbos. Why? Because Shabbos, you don't give your life for it. So you see that Gilei Rayis is more chomer than Shabbos, and you don't give your life for it. So what about Gilei Rayis? Gilei Rayis is seemingly going to be the thing that we're going to say, you do care more about the relationship with Hashem than you do about the penalty. And if that's the case, well then, you have Shabbos, you have Gilei Rayis. And so how do you know this idea that really it's just because the Torah says? Okay. So to that, the Alter Rebbe says, I'll tell you, because Shabbos is actually more chomer than Gilei Rayis. How do you prove that Shabbos is more chomer than Gilei Rayis? Because when it comes to Shechita, we say that Shabbos, some of the desecrate Shabbos is like violating the whole Torah. It's like desecrating the whole Torah. How we know this, by the way, it is a Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara in Chulin doesn't really give an explanation. The best explanation that I've been able to find, I'm not such a fantastic researcher, but the best explanation I've been able to find is a Rashi, a simple Rashi at the end of Parashat Shlach. He brings from the Yisoid of Rabbi Moshe Darshan, and it's not necessarily something that's Talmudically sourced from the Amirayim or anything. I don't know what the source of Rabbi Moshe Darshan is, but it's from his Yisoid, says Rashi, and Rashi is a pretty decent guy to rely on. Shouldn't be calling Rashi a guy, but regardless, he says that there's a hekesh. It says that it talks about the carbon for a violation of Avodah Zarah, and then immediately it launches into a discussion about Shabbos in Parashat Shlach. And so Rashi says that the hekesh is to tell you that someone that desecrates Shabbos is like someone that serves Avodah Zarah. Okay, I'm seeing that we're getting a little bit close. I think we'll say 35, 40 minutes in Hashem. But anyhow, I digress. So Shabbos Avodah Zarah, so there you have a hekesh. By the way, in theory, you could say this is the reason why the Gemara insists that it is for Hesya. Again, the Gemara isn't really giving sources, so we're kind of left in the dark over here. But maybe this is the reason why, because what's the discussion about Shabbos? The discussion about Shabbos is about the Mukeshish Eitzim, someone that went out and publicly gathered wood on Shabbos in order to show the people, this is what the Drush says, that it was Slafchat and Kefer, and he went out, he wanted to show the people that keeping Shabbos is no joke, and that it's possible for them to be killed for working on Shabbos, and this is actually before Matan Torah, and Slafchat, ultimately, he ended up being killed. This is the story. Tzlafchad was doing his work on Shabbos in public, and that was the whole point, that it wasn't public, it was supposed to be a public desecration of Shabbos, and so you could say that the hekesh between Shabbos and Avodah Zarah is only about a public desecration of Shabbos. This is the idea, in theory. The Gemara in Chulin doesn't really give much about this. It just says, in the context of Shechita and about being a moment of Chol Kula, which disqualifies a person from Shechita, it says a brayta which talks about accepting korbanos from people, and it says that people that are mechal Shabbos for Hesya are listed with people that serve Avodah Zarah. It is in Shulchan Aruch that it is paskin in a practical sense, that this means that we actually accept the classification, because again, the Gemara in Chulin is not discussing someone that's mechal Shabbos for Hesya, which is probably why we have not too much about it. We have some details more, Maseches Eruvin, if I'm not mistaken, Maseches Beitza maybe, but it's not too much information that we have about Machal Shabbos for Hesya for this reason, because it's not really something that comes up in the conversation. But in the Shulchan Aruch, it's Taka Paskin, that you have this detail, that it disqualifies a person's Shechita. You see, there is a tzad chomer to Shabbos, that Shabbos is considered more so than any other Avera, is considered like someone that violates the whole Torah, to the point that there are consequences. I think this is maybe the reason why it's quoted from the Shulchan Aruch, because in the Gemara, you might be able to slip away from saying that Itaka has any effect. It's only a Kabbanis is that we don't take Kabbanis from him. There are other details I might make that you can't take Kabbanis from a person. It might be Xeris HaKosov, particularly by Kabbanis, but when it's possible in Shulchan Aruch, we know that this is Taka the case, that a person that's Mechal Shabbos is Taka someone that it's like they've completely severed their connection. You see that Shabbos is really, in a sense, playing with the leagues of Avodah Zarah. But it's not playing with the leagues of Avodah Zarah because it in itself has a problem that is the ruining of the relationship with Hashem. And why do we say this? Because we know that you're Mechal Shabbos in order to save a life. You're Mechal Shabbos in order to save a life. So, if it were like Avodah Zarah Mamish, not just because of the Chaymer of Shabbos, but if it were because it's like Avodah Zarah Mamish, like the Gemara in Cholin is somewhat implying, then you would say that you'll always give your life for it because you can't bear to be disconnected from Hashem. Elamai, you can bear in the sense of Mechal Shabbos, and the reason why is because it's not like Avodah Zarah, it's just because of the Chaymer of Shabbos. But the Chaymer of Shabbos translates to a practical effect, as in we're having our cake and we're eating it too. We're going to say that someone that's Mechal Shabbos is like they're a moment for the whole Torah. We're also going to say the reason is not because it's in some way a form of Avodah Zarah, but rather it's because of just the Chaymer of Shabbos. This serves to push away the notion of Gilei Arayis being more chomer than Shabbos. Why? Because even though to one extent it is more chomer, but it's more chomer because of a side reason. As in, Shabbos has its chumras. Shabbos has the fact that a desecration of Shabbos is literally like a desecration of the whole Torah. And that includes Gilei Arayis. If a person violates what's the 307 mitzvahs? There's 307 mitzvahs that a person is violating. Then that means that they're a momer also, Ruba Kikole, and 307 is the majority of 613. Barabim, barabum, that's a momer. You can't trust their shchita. Even if they're makbid on only the highest standard of shchita, and they don't use the Erev, and they definitely don't serve with the Zarah, but nevertheless, their shchita is unavailable because they're momer l'chol terah kola. Because Ruba Kikole. But Gilei Arayis is able to be in that klal. And Shabbos is overarching, it's encompassing. That a person is Mechal Shabbos like they're violating the entire Torah. And so it includes Gilei Arayis within it. And that's something that I think is brought up from the Shulchan Aruch. And then we get on. Is it the last point? I think it's the last point. What's the Xeris HaKosov? What's the Xeris HaKosov that the Alter Rebbe is referring to? And to this, I think we need to look a little bit more. I really hope we're going to finish this in under 40 minutes. With this, we need to look at the idea of what's actually underpinning the fact that you give your life for these averos. Avodah Zarah in the thesis is really, it's great. Because the whole thesis is that you don't want to be disconnected from Hashem. Avodah Zarah is the idea of denying the relationship with Hashem, so it makes a lot of sense that you should be giving your life for it. And it's something that we learned from the Pasuk of right? Fantastic. Why is it that when a person taka, sometimes Alter Rebbe and Tanya might make it seem like no one ever shmadze chas v'shalom, but unfortunately it has happened over the generations that they are yidden and they choose to embrace a life of Avodah Zarah. I don't really know if it depends on if you say Christianity is Avodah Zarah. That in itself was a whole conversation. I don't really know if it was happening with pagan religions mamash, but I heard that they definitely chas v'shalom leave the fold. But ultimately, we do not give them any punishment, even if it is an onus. I mean, not even if it is. When it is an onus, when there is a force or pressure, etc., we do not give a punishment. Now, there are a couple of reasons why we could say that this is the case. One reason is simply because there's an avera to punish someone that does an avera with an onus. The example, again, has to do with rape. That is the avlu cholano. And it says that that you should not do anything to the woman because the woman does not have a sin which is worthy of death. Now, there's an interesting idea that exists. Did the woman do an avera? Right? She was doing nothing. There's no maisa, but we still say that you could have a lav shein b'maisa. There are even lavin that typically involve maisa, and another person is able to do them and soak up the punishment. Do we say that it's her avera? And it's an interesting conversation. There would be conversation to be had from the sugya that is in your day on Simon Kuf Pei Dalet about different notions of kapara, etc., etc. There are sometimes that it seemingly implies over there, I don't want to get too in-depth into this, seemingly implies over there that there is an avera that's happening, but still it's an onus and therefore you don't need a kapara, but the avera is still happening. So you have that idea that the avera is taka happening when a person serves with the zara and it is an onus. Now, the real question, I mean, you could say that is one avenue you could take. There's another avenue that you could take. It's a little bit trickier. And with this, we can just give a little bit of a chakira, and then hopefully we can finish before 40 minutes. The other avenue that you could take is that really the avera is take hudcha from v'chai b'hem. And that would mean even avodah zarah in theory. That the point of every mitzvah is simply doesn't override the need to preserve life, and as such, every avera will be pushed off in the face of v'chai b'hem. Now really the avera will still be there, and it'll be a bad thing, right? But sometimes you gotta take the bad thing in order to live. So then the question becomes, why are there some averas that we talk and say that you need to give your life? So to this you can say a very interesting idea, which is Torah comes and it puts forward a new reason for why you should be giving your life. That is to say, Taket says in the pasuk v'chai b'hem, and we're going to take v'chai b'hem, and it's true. And so the avera is hodcha. It's really hodcha. And that's why you don't get a punishment, because when an avera is hodcha, obviously you're not getting a punishment. You don't tell the guy that's cutting off the figs on Shabbos that really he has to bring a chatos because he's cutting figs on Shabbos. No, it's hodcha. The avera is pushed away in the face of the larger thing that you're doing. And taka, to save your life, even in avodah zarah, gilayis, shechas damim, it's all pushed away. Only that, the Torah comes and it tells us extra information. It tells us extra information that tells us that we're supposed to give our lives for these things. You have a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, and Mechal, Kiddush Hashem is a big conversation when it comes to these things. Any avera that is in Farhasya, you're supposed to give your life for. The idea of Farhasya comes in again, by the way. But any avera that is Farhasya, you're supposed to give your life for, rather than Chas v'Shalom violate it. What's the reason why you're supposed to give your life for an avera? Well, I mean, you would say because Kiddush Hashem, and when it's Rabim, etc., then yeah, it really has an effect in Kiddush Hashem. And Kiddush Hashem is the driving force behind every time that we'll give our lives in order to do a mitzvah, and avodah zarah, gilei rayis, and shvichas damim are no exception. As for how you know that it is a Kiddush Hashem, really, any time that a person gives their life in order to do a mitzvah, it is a Kiddush Hashem. Elamai, you have a v'chai b'hem. How do you weigh the two? So if the Torah gives a hint that says, in this case, you should taka give your life, then you know that you should taka give your life. Like, for example, in avodah zarah, that it says, you should love Hashem with all of your heart and all of your soul, and we dash in that, even if they take your soul, which is a pretty easy drasha to swallow. So in that case, the Torah is telling you clearly that it's worth giving your life for it. Murder is a logic that how could you stand by, or not stand by, how could you actively kill someone in order to save your own life? So it's a mitzvah to not kill someone, and the logic just is so powerful that in pushing you in the direction of saying that you should rather give your life. And when it comes to Gilei Reis, you have that comparing it to something that's so logical that you would never want to kill someone in order to save your life. And the Torah tells you that rape is analogous to that. And so you see the sexual averas are taka fitting that a person should give their life for them. So this is the idea that exists, and there is an interesting nafkamina that exists that occurred to me, which is that if you have a person and they violate one of these averas in order to save their life, are they kosher to be witnesses? There's an idea that someone that does an avera that is malchus or up, they are not kosher to be a witness anymore. There are other averas also that are more monetary based, but an avera that is malchus or up in regards to the isurin aspect of it, they are no longer kosher to be a witness. So a person that violates, let's say, gilayis rayis, in order to save their life. So are they kosher witnesses? If you look at it, that the reason why they need to give their life is because of the mitzvah itself, and v'chai b'hem doesn't apply to these things, and rather the reason why you don't get a punishment is simply because it's an einas rachmana patre, so then you'll say they're apostle witnesses. They didn't get the punishment. Okay, not every person needs to get malchus. But when a person gets malchus, they become kosher again, because it says niglah'dike by malchus. That once they're disgraced, they become achicha again, and so they're no longer considered to be a rasha. So obviously, in every case where you have someone that's malchus, where they're not being punished, and this person is not being punished, they have no way of getting punished, and it's a little bit of a nebach on them. They have no way of resuming their status, although with things like rape, etc., they would be killed, and so they wouldn't be able to be a kosher witness anyway after that. But that's beside the point. Ultimately, the avera is done. They can't get punished, but they still did an avera that's that bad, so they're chayiv. If you look at it, then no, really the avera is cancelled by v'chai b'hem. Elamai, it's Kiddush Hashem, it's a positive mitzvah. There's an idea that someone that violates a positive mitzvah, they're Posel D'Rabbanan, but to be Posel D'Rabbanan is much more complicated. You need to have achraza, etc., etc. So it's not so simple and straightforward that they should be posel witnesses. And until there is a proper announcement, etc., given, they're not going to be posel witnesses. They're going to be totally kosher witnesses. Because the only reason why they're giving their life is not because of the Avera itself, it's because of Kiddush Hashem. And really, I'm a little bit biased towards the second way of looking at it, because I think that when you follow the psukim, it's not taken away from Chayvahem. It seems to be, at least that's how my mind is leaning toward. I'm not here to start giving proofs. That's maybe another share, more in the Rambam and Hilchos Seder Torah. There's proofs from Rishonim, different sugis in the Gemara, but we're already at 40 minutes, and I want to kind of wrap this up. So ultimately, the point is, when the Alter Rebbe says at the end, Xeris HaKosov, he could be referring to Gilei Rayas, in saying that that's Xeris HaKosov, that the Torah decrees that Kikash Yokum Ishal Reiro Tzachai Nefesh, and that's the only reason why it is for Gilei Rayas. But I think that with the point of the Alter Rebbe, it actually doesn't really fit to say that. Because if you say that, then you would say that Gilei Rayas is Taka, there's a Xera that is so important in Chomer, etc. It might not be that every other Avera is like this, but still you'll have the question with Gilei Rayas at the end of the day. You'll have the question of Gilei Rayas seems to demonstrate that there is a notion that you give your life in order to not violate an Avera. By the way, just very quick point is that you can explain the whole machlokes of the Rambam and thesis about if you're supposed to give your life in order to, not if you're supposed to, but if you can give your life in order to not violate another Avera. You could explain it based on Kol Anal, and I don't really have time to get into that, but just an interesting tidbit. But Gilei Rayas would stand to show that there is a notion that the Avera is still bad, even if it's in the face of your life. And I think that Alter Rebbe, what he's coming to say when he says Xeris HaKosov, is that he's referring back to the original Shabbos, that it's Xeris HaKosov. And why really do you even need it for Shabbos? It's a very niche case to say that there's going to be a vadai, that you'll be able to save someone's life, and so therefore it should be hutra, etc., etc. It's a little bit of a davar rachik, so much so that it's not really discussed in halacha so much, cases that relate to it. But at the end of the day, I think that the Alter Rebbe is saying that is Xeris HaKosov. Xeris HaKosov is coming to show you that your life is valuable and worth it and important, and so much so that the Torah is saying that mitzvahs are put on hold for it, but not just in a sense. Taka, typically we're going to say v'chai b'hem, but all of it is ultimately the will of Hashem. All of it is ultimately that Hashem wants. It's a detail baked into mitzvahs that we're supposed to protect our lives at the expense of mitzvahs. Even though it's a mitzvah, even though it's taka being violated, but Hashem wants that it should taka be in that way. This is what Hashem wants for the relationship. But when it comes to disconnecting from Hashem, chas v'shalom, for that, there's nothing that could stand in our way. I think that's the point of the Alter Rebbe, and I maybe shaved off a minute from the last one, but it's at least a lot less noisy. So yeah, l'chaim.